Thanks, everybody. Thanks for having us. I think, as Michael said, I wanted to reiterate one thing that Michael said, that we're going to talk a lot about tinkering and the work that we do at the Exploratorium around tinkering. We are not here to propose that you throw out everything that you've ever learned or every way that you ever learned as a student or as a learner, but we're trying to provide some alternative and some complementary facet to the spectrum of experiences that you might get as a student over your lifetime. Through lecture, through hands-on activities, through demonstrations. The question for us is, what are we missing if we don't have a chance or many opportunities in our lifetime to engage firsthand with science phenomenon, art-related processes, and tools, materials, and other stuff? And so really that's what we have to share a little bit about today with you.
And I would say the irony is not lost on the format that we're in right now, right? So a couple of things, you're going to perk up. A couple of things I'm going to talk to you about are just kind of the reasons behind tinkering, like what is it and why is it going on at the Exploratorium? Why is there all this attention being given to it? To us, tinkering and learning they're so connected. And we really believe in this idea of constructionism, that people think differently when you're in the act of actively making something. So a lot of what we have to offer really does deal with physical stuff. But I know kind of a little bit about the world that you're in. I spent a lot of time at the Media Lab in the Lifelong Kindergarten group. So a lot of times I'm going to be talking physical, but I think a lot of those ideas actually apply in the digital realm too. Yeah. I'm gonna read from this. Oh yeah, here's a great quote. So that these two things, yeah, tinkering and learning, they're completely intertwined. But I think the idea behind why offering this stuff is we really want people to develop a tinkerer's disposition, we call it, right? We want you to be able to confront something that you don't necessarily know how to do at the onset. The outcome isn't predetermined, and you're going to be able to maneuver through whatever it is to get somewhere, probably to have some dead ends along the way, follow some strange tangents. But this ability, it's a practice. The more you do it, the more you tinker, the better you get. So the idea that we're going to offer people these experiences as a valid way of learning. We really see it as a serious endeavor. It's not just this fun, frivolous thing. We get that a lot. It is fun. I mean, it's definitely fun. When people come in to the museum, though, can you go back for just,
yeah.
That's my cue that I'm talking too much. People do say a lot, like, this is really fun, but what are they learning, right? But twist that around, like, right? This looks like learning, but is it fun? So anyway, just something to think about. I think this is a lovely quote from Mitchell Resnick about the things that we're going to be confronted with, kind of the digital natives of today, they change so rapidly. So let's not worry so much about getting facts, scientific facts, kind of learned by rote necessarily. We do have to have some of that, but be able to really think creatively about things and tinker, literally, with kind of whatever the environment is that you're in, whether it's elementary school or graduate school or just life in general.
Ready?
I think the maker movement is really providing an amazing opportunity. Do you know about Maker Faire? Yes? If you don't, I would encourage you to get to San Mateo on the 17th and 18th of next month. But I feel like this insurgence now, it's kind of in the zeitgeist, this attention being given to DIY, kind of an appreciation for the handmade. And a lot of it had to do with Make Magazine and these maker fairs. I feel like it provides an excellent opportunity for the educational realm. But I think we have to be careful of two things. One, sometimes when, I'll say this, primarily me, when educators take this stuff on, sometimes we can suck the joy out of things, right? So we have to be careful of that, because I feel like the maker movement, it really builds on this incredible enthusiasm of experts and novices coming together over an incredible variety in terms of background, art, science, technology. You see it all kind of mashed up together. Anyway, I just want to make sure. Oh yeah. And I feel like you asked the question, what is Stanford going to look like, 20 years from now? I would say the same thing. What are museums going to look like? I feel like we're poised to really change the way people learn. And anyway, yeah, I get all overexcited about that.
So I want to talk a little bit about tinkering and making and the history of the Exploratorium. Have any of you been to the old Exploratorium? The Palace of Fine Arts, good. What about the new one? Have you been to the new building? I encourage you to go. We're really proud of what we've just put together, and we feel like the heart and soul transferred right to this new building. We spent a lot of time doing that, but we're really proud of that. But tinkering and making is not something new to the Exploratorium or to many museums in general. Historically, through the exhibit development process, artist residencies, teacher institute programs where teachers are actively building and making things for their classroom, and the public programs where we'll bring in visitors and other people to share process and projects, it's always been a part of the Exploratorium's history and continues to be. The question that we had, though, is that all of the preparation and the experimentation and the exploration that the exhibit developers and the artists and the teachers would do kind of behind the scenes weren't always present on the museum floor. It's probably pretty obvious that it's easier to use a spot welder and a jigsaw in the shop than it is to use on the museum floor. But we asked the question, could we bring some tools and materials and some long-term explorations out into a space that we call the Tinkering Studio? So we'll talk about the Tinkering Studio and how that envelops some of the work that we're talking about.
And wait, can you just hang on that for a second? So we were talking with a few people over lunch. In the old space, we had this, they gave us the back corner. It was kind of where we did our first prototype, our proof of concept for the Tinkering Studio. Now we're actually front and center. We are right when you get there in the beginning. So we've grown a lot in size.
So at the new Exploratorium, we've got a new space, the Tinkering Studio. We'll talk a lot about the different activities that we do, but it's an environment that we had to, first of all, kind of hide the entrance to. This is a space where we were wanting a lot of people to come in, but spend a lot of time working on projects. So we couldn't work with everybody at the museum, and we couldn't welcome everybody at the first minute that they come through the building. So we spent some time trying to carefully design that space. But it is a building where we have loose parts, tools, and materials that allow us to explore different scientific phenomenon or different artistic practices. And we'll show you a few of those. I thought we'd first start with a quick video from an experiment that we tried a couple of years ago when we were trying to prove this concept. We held a series of events called tinkering events. And what we tried to do was figure out, could we design activities on the museum floor with loose parts and loose materials, and what would visitors actually do?
These things were called open make. So we chose our themes ahead of time, and we would basically put out an all call to all the people that we knew and said, we're tackling this theme. One year it was materials based. It was like cardboard, plastic, metal, wood,
wire, yeah.
Wood, something, yeah. And then one year it was everything that started with T, because we were the Tinkering Studio. Toys, trash.
Tools and time.
Tools, time, yeah. Anyway, so the one you're going to see is about toys. It's about 3.5 minutes.
Right. What I want you to do is just see if you can recognize moments of thinking and learning. Because you might see a lot of technology, you might see a lot of loose parts, toys, and materials, but we really are trying to figure out if we can create and orchestrate these moments where people are thinking and learning together.
Here, push the button. Wait till he stops. Okay, push. I hear something.
That's an amazing movement. I'll hold him down. You want to This part may hurt your finger a little bit.
Ready? Oh, look at that little piece. Look at this. Don't pull it. Hey.
Slower. Faster. There you go. Too fast.
We're still trying to get it to stand up by itself. See? Not so far. Just gonna try to visualize this first, what we're doing. Oh Oh, standing up a little bit more.
More like.
That's true. That was probably that.
It's got one on its.
Oh, perfect then. So it'll be just that one.
I have a ring.
Nice. All right. So then you want to attach it onto your bracelet.
You start off with just a bracelet.
So we have a
one,
Petrich.
or you can also make like an earring to add to it. Yeah.
And like wiggle it a little bit, and now it looks more like a lollipop.
Yeah, but it's big Lego and stuff. All of the little fine details on the computer, we do it all 3D. And then from there on, we start getting manufactured toys. So, for example, this is a first prototype of this character, and you can see the difference in paint job and the size. And this is the toy we actually end up with.
Okay, you want me to stick in? Can you feed on this side? You feed the wire on this side. I'll feed that wire on the other side. Are you gonna put some the scribblers on the bottom? Yeah. Okay. All right. So let's find some more tape.
And with the code that we provide for it, you can actually give it like just any music, and it'll detect the beat and dance.
Yeah, it uses something called Charlie plexing, which takes advantage of the fact that the pins on the Arduino can be used for either output or input.
So that you pull it out. Okay. And then make it cut from the other side. Like now you wanna press it here.
I might get the teacher's part. The class sizes are bigger now.
What looks good for a bottom?
Let's see how we're doing here.
It's still
On the top.
it's still cooling. This one is.
We'll glue this here. Yeah, I think this will work. Oh, taps.
So for us, the things that both at OpenMake and in the Tinkering Studio, we look for, and sometimes get it wrong. I mean, a lot of things that we offer, they're not without their problems. But if you took this Venn diagram and did art, science, and technology, we think that sweet spot in the middle where you almost couldn't decide, is this art, is this science, is this technology? We like those things the most and try to capitalize on those and have more of those kinds of experiences offered.
So, but we also don't design these things for kids. I mean, there are a lot of kids that enjoy and work with these projects with us, but this is not a kid-based endeavor in terms of our design. So what I thought we would do is talk a little bit about the design principles that we have, and then how that maps onto some of the learning outcomes that we're looking for. So in the activities that you saw and the other activities that we do, we break down our design principles into 3 categories. The first is the activity design itself. What are the tools and the materials that we bring to this endeavor? And what are the goals that we have in terms of meeting people at where they come in with their knowledge, and what's the scientific content that we're hoping that they walk away with, or the scientific process skills? We also choose materials that are inviting or engaging in some immediate way and actually continue to work in that way as you complexify your ideas. And what's most important for us is that we're not trying to bring everybody in and give them the quickest step-by-step resolution to what they don't know by saying this is the best explanation for you. We're trying to provide multiple pathways in and through these explorations so that 3 different people might explore the activity in slightly different ways based on what they come in thinking about, their experience in that moment with other people, and then what they might bring to it next time.
And I would just want to point out this one, the STEM is a means, not an end. I mean, a lot of people come to us for professional development work, and their goal is to do STEM work in their classroom. We feel like tinkering is a way to get you there, but it really truly is about the means and not like STEM as the goal.
So facilitation is another category that we carefully pay attention to. All of the activities that we have in the tinkering studio on the museum floor are facilitated by ourselves or explainers. These are teenage and college-age students who come in and they get a lot of training from us, and they're the facilitators. They're the people who are guiding and helping people through these explorations. Some of the things that we pay attention to as we're designing activities is, in terms of facilitation, how do we welcome people, and what's the initial spark that might get people interested in doing something? Once they've started working on a project, how do we sustain them? You know, we were talking about getting people going, and sometimes it can be really frustrating if you don't know what your next step is going to be. So we help people through that next step. Oftentimes, you might figure out how to hook up a wire and a battery and a bulb in an unexpected way that happened by accident. And so then as a facilitator, we can step in and kind of check your knowledge to make sure that if it was an accident, there are other opportunities and other materials that we can offer to help that. And then finally, the environment.
So the environment, it's an important one for us. And here, this is again where it's kind of physical, digital are very connected to me. But what can you do in an environment that makes people comfortable? Makes people comfortable with coming in and not necessarily knowing. So how can you, can the environment be shaped so tentative ideas can be tried out? I mean, I don't, well, yeah, okay, I won't go down that path. I'll say something about this later. But I also feel like this ways for you to come into a social space, whether it's online or in the museum, that would allow for cross-fertilization of ideas also is another kind of interesting territory to be in.
And I think that environment goes a long way. You know, there are just a couple of us for 30 or 50 people, so 2 facilitators are not going to be able to spend the entire 40 or 50 minutes with each individual learner. So how do we create an environment in such a way where people are situated around the work tables and start facilitating each other as they develop new ideas or as they make new insights? And so trying to figure out what that environment is that sort of encourages this collective sharing of ideas through the process.
And well, can I say just one more thing? I think also having an opportunity for people to feel like they do have a sense of autonomy and they're kind of working on their idea, but they're also participating in something larger than themselves, I think is good.
So then the design principles go so far in terms of our goals for the activity, but the question for our team is also, what are our goals about education? What are the educational outcomes that we hope to get to? And so we've spent some time talking about this, and we broke them down into four big ideas. First of all, how do we think about getting people engaged in these things? Sometimes they come in with a proclivity to start working on a project, and sometimes we have to have the 100,000 toothpick sculpture that Scott Weaver's been working on for 37 years. It's so outlandish that people become engaged just because of that fact. What is it through the activity where we can support learners to take their own initiative and build and construct with real intentionality? How do we develop, like we were just discussing, that social scaffold within the environment so that people can actually support one another? And finally, even though 90% of schools and curriculum are focused on development of understanding for the content.
Or more this word, right? Take
yes, understanding. We're not leaving it out. We do have a goal that people are going to understand more about circuits or light and color and sound or mechanics when they leave. But it's just part of the overall set of learning dimensions that we have.
So this is interesting because when you are learning how to develop a curriculum, usually the thing you start with is just number 4 there. Like, what are your learning goals? What are the things that someone can leave being able to state or accomplish? And the top 3 feel to me much more like the kinds of things that you would associate with many other kinds of activities. And I'm wondering, is this something you brought to the table? Is this something that you're drawing together, like sort of more the museum kind of perspective here?
Well, it feels to me like, so the design principles were sort of, as we're developing something to try out on the floor, we try to hit a lot of those things. And when people are engaged in one of those activities, we came up with ways of describing kind of the behaviors we were looking for, and that's where the learning dimensions comes in. And I think with each one of these, we'll see some in a minute, but I think each one of those to us was our end goal. You'll kind of see more along each one of those, but I think the words development of understanding was also really critical, because getting straight to that content goal is not necessarily our end goal.
And I don't think anybody can truly develop an understanding or change their knowing about something without a social endeavor of some sort, without intentionally practicing and exploring this work for themselves or becoming personally engaged in that process. However, if you never get here, if you never develop an understanding about the content that we're wanting to offer, I mean, we can engage and entertain people until we're blue in the face, but if it doesn't get to the point where you're actually complexifying in your ideas and shifting your understanding about something, it's an activity that doesn't have as much meaning for us as one that actually hits all of these things. So then, what are the indicators for us as we're facilitating and designing these spaces? What is it about each of those four learning dimensions that, when visitors are with us, indicate that something interesting and important is happening? And so we'll break it down just a little bit for each one.
Yeah, so Mike was just saying the spending time. I mean, that's definitely part of it, but we want more than that. You know, it's great that people want to spend time in the tinkering studio. But if you follow kind of engagement down to the next level, we also believe that another indicator of that is really showing motivation and interest. And what does that look like? So it looks like, not sure what that emotion is that's going on there, but definitely motivated. Sometimes it's kind of joy and pride, and you'll hear it in what people say, but it's a connection or kind of a reason that they're compelled to kind of keep going with their investigations.
And again, being personally engaged in this is really important, because very quickly, if you're pushing on your thinking, you might become frustrated at the fuzziness that you're moving into. An example might be if you come in and start working with circuit boards with us, and you're connecting batteries to bulbs using wires, you might get that pretty quickly. But when I enter a new idea and ask you to integrate a switch or to make 3 light bulbs turn on instead of just 1, that becomes a little bit of a challenge, and I think pushes against some people's understanding. If you're not truly engaged and interested in solving that problem, I think it's really hard to push your ideas to that next level.
And then the initiative and intentionality, this is kind of still going in kind of a hierarchy of things. We want people to come into the space and be able to set their own goals, not necessarily have that coming from us. And this is a great example. She was working with sewn circuits to create this bracelet and had some working knowledge of circuits in the beginning, but by the time she left, it was much deeper, and yeah, she was quite proud.
This is another sort of idea about intentionality and persisting in this problem space. One of the things that we try to do is offer complex challenges or complex activities that actually force you to want to persist in building through that moment. So Scott Weaver is a fellow who's been working for 35 years in his living room constructing a city of San Francisco out of toothpicks. And we've had it at the Exploratorium for the last couple of years. And the interesting thing to us is, for us, this piece looks done. I mean, after 35 years and 100,000 toothpicks, you'd think that this piece is finished. He comes in every other week to interact with the public, but has been spending more and more time lately with his back to the public, continuing to work on his piece. So what is it about the compelling and sort of the engagement level that we can design into these activities that allow people of all ages and backgrounds to be engaged at this point?
This one is sort of tongue-in-cheek. I mean, we do want opportunities that allow people to persist in the problem space. But I think for us with Scott, the cool thing about it for me is we get to offer a platform for him to come and share his work. I met him walking across the parking lot at a grocery store near my house. He's the produce manager there. He was wearing a toothpick hat. I mean, I've definitely, my radar is tuned now. I look for makers and tinkerers all the time. But, we struck up a conversation. And come to find out, he had this 9-foot by 9-foot sculpture that he called Rolling Through the Bay. It's an homage to San Francisco. But it's more than just a toothpick sculpture. There are 7 different runs that you can stick a ping pong ball down, and it takes a tour of San Francisco, and it'll take you through different areas of San Francisco. Anyway, I absolutely love that it's there at the museum, offers him a place to share his work and for other people to appreciate it. And I also, as Mike was saying, he literally is still going. He built this whole thing for the 49ers, and when we lost, he didn't put it on. But he just added Sutro Towers just last weekend.
A couple of other things. Another thing about the intentionality, again, these are the indicators. These are what people are saying and doing when we're noticing that these activities are working for us. And so one of the things that we often try to figure out is how can we support people to take intellectual risks? It's not so easy for young people, but especially difficult for adults to be comfortable not knowing something. So what is it about the environment or our facilitation or the activity itself that allows people to take an intellectual risk, to go someplace where they're not comfortable going because as an adult, you're supposed to know the answers? But the other thing that we do is we sort of parallel that with risk-taking in terms of mess and danger and using real tools and real materials. This is a portable spot welder that we're using to solder together lengths of wire on the museum floor. This had never been done before at the Exploratorium. We had to get more permits than you can imagine. But it was worth it because we had young men and women coming in and spot welding alongside parents who actually showed up that day because their job is as a spot welder, and they wanted to share that experience with each other. The other fascinating thing about taking intellectual and even personal risks with some of these things is that we don't shy away from danger. We use hot glue guns and sharp knives and lots of power tools on the floor in safe ways, but we want to get people their first encounter sometimes with these tools in an environment that's purposeful and supported. And it's fascinating to watch how much more careful kids are with real tools and real danger than even adults or some of us are at times.
But the intellectual risks that Mike is talking about are kind of showing intellectual courage. It's the kind of thing we mean is when you're working around a table and somebody sort of asserts an idea that is in disagreement with someone next to them. Having that confidence to say, no, I don't really think that's the way that works. It's that kind of thing. Social scaffolding. The museum is a social space. The tinkering studio is a social space on steroids. You work really close to each other. This example on the right is marble machines, and it's basically pegboard from Home Depot and stuff you can get, molding and pipes and tube and stuff like that, and you're just building kind of runs for marbles. The thing I love about it is lots of people crowd around and work on this thing and often end up working with people that they didn't come into the museum with. That's not something we see in other parts of the museum. So I find it really interesting. And they're also not afraid to sort of look at something that's not working, even stating it out loud, and then someone will quickly come over and then join in their investigation right along with them.
We spend a lot of time thinking about environments and also activities that support the social scaffolding. So when we see visitors who didn't come in together, actually sharing ideas and helping each other out, it's a really important moment that we look at and try to figure out what's going on here. Sometimes we're very purposeful with the activity. You saw the marble runs is one way where you can enter an environment and everybody's building marble runs. This is an activity that we're trying right now called light play. It's a slow-moving motor and some interesting LEDs that actually creates light and shadow kinetic sculptures on these small portable screens. So small groups, 2, 3 at a time, will come in and construct little light play vignettes. And this is all about geometry of light and shadows and the distance between the light source and the shadow maker and the screen. But it's an evocative and sort of beautiful outcome that you end up building when you're finished. But you're not taking it home. Many of the things that we build, you're not taking home. You're actually leaving behind for other visitors to come in and start working on after you. Or in this case, all of the individual screens are placed into a large cabinet in the back. So behind the child and the woman, there are 15 spaces for different light vignettes for you to actually contribute your contraption to the rest of the museum in that way, and then let new people come in to take a look at what's been done before you and maybe get some ideas about what to happen next.
And here's more about the development of understanding. To us, learning isn't linear and it's not terminal. You don't get to this point and you're like, okay, I know this now. We often see a lot of kind of development happening when people are going to talk about or express a realization through affect or utterances. And what we mean by that is kind of you'll see somebody working and they're like, oh, I get it. That's connected. You'll hear it. You see it too in their body language. That's kind of the initial development of understanding. And we try to either highlight, mention those in passing, kind of get other people kind of into those investigations together by what folks are saying.
And some of the under indicators, the other thing that we see visitors doing a lot is sharing explanations with each other, persisting in that trouble space, becoming frustrated, but actually pushing through it because they just really want to understand. Or, as I mentioned before, really trying to figure out how we can help people apply what they've just explored to some new situation. So I can complexify their project by adding a new element or component. Or I might show that somebody next to them is working on a more complex idea and ask them to work together a little bit. People are very willing to do that, to actually try to figure out if they can take something that they think they understand and apply it to a slightly different situation.
Can I tell them what that is?
Yeah.
So we have one activity that's kind of on the other side of the space going on when this is happening. I wish you could really see to truly appreciate what's going on. But it's an activity called circuit boards. So it's basic kind of, you would go to Radio Shack, or DigiKey, pull these things off of the shelf, put them in a table in front of you, and start hooking things up. There's no kind of set instructions or step-by-step direction. It's really kind of what part interests you and can you figure it out.
And we've done a lot of activities where it's toy dissection, you know, like the Elmo doll with that kid. Like, how do you take apart a mechanical toy to the point where it still works, but you've got it in as many pieces as possible? A real purposeful dissection activity.
So what I love about this one, we have these adult nights now. So every Thursday we're open from 6 to 10 for adults only. And the first one of the month, we kind of do these blowout events. February's was Sexplorations, you know, it was Valentine's time. So what is happening here is a local store, Good Vibrations, donated some equipment. And this young lady with the purple hair on the right is talking about some experience that she's had with this equipment. And it has to do directly with the circuit boards. So they're talking about reasons for motors that are strong, vibrations that are more noticeable and less noticeable. I mean, I was turning every shade of red. I was totally embarrassed throughout this investigation, but it was one of those incredible moments. Like, she was really applying direct experience with her experience there on the floor of the museum.
We don't do sex toy dissections every night, but when we can. Then there's just one sort of summary statement, and this comes from a colleague and mentor to us, Paul Tatter, who, if there's anything that we're really trying to say here through all the design focus and the learning indicators, it's something like this. I mean, suppose that we assume that the purpose of learning and education is not just to remember a lot of things, or to provide a product. That's what a lot of the maker movement is about, this building this step-by-step product. But rather, if education is about changing one's life, and people changing their lives means that they're changing their relationships with each other, the things that they're interacting with, and with their understanding of who they are themselves. If learning has to do with the meanings of things, and I think this has now a lot to do with design and thinking about interface, if learning has to do with the meanings of things, and those meanings have to do with the uses of those things in our lives, well, then the meaning is in the use.
Is the use.
You want to talk about this?
Yeah, so if something connected that we were saying with you and kind of resonated with you, we want to know about it. Look us up. We actually just came out with a book called The Art of Tinkering that talks more about a lot of the work that we do with our artists and scientists and residents. It's filled with a collection of kind of high and low tech approaches that are kind of part whimsical and wonderful, but I have a couple books up here that you can come and check out if you want. It has conductive ink on its cover, which we absolutely loved. Since a lot of the stuff we do has to do with circuits, we wanted people to tinker directly with the book. And I'll say one other thing. We're offering a MOOC through Coursera that starts in June on the 22nd. We're skeptical about this. We don't quite know how tinkering is going to translate to this environment, but it's called The Fundamentals of Tinkering, and it's going to be a 6-week course to dive into the world of circuits through tinkering.
Thank you.
Can we take some questions?
Yeah.
I've got one. So we have, it seems like a lot of this is relatively high touch point. So like you noted that you had a number of volunteers coming in and asking questions. And this is something that has been on my mind recently where, say, courses in HCI that were originally designed for 30 people now are limiting enrollment at 80. And we have to back up and say, are we being as effective as educators and engaging people in conversation with materials at that scale? And I'm wondering if you have any thoughts or advice. Now, at lunch you had basically said our solution is to get fewer people into the room. And now we feel this tension between we want as many people who want to learn this, we want to let them be able to do so, or I could just cut out half the people from the class and say, you're going to have the excellent experience and everyone else gets 0. So are there ways to scale this? Is it just through volunteers? I mean, what do you do here?
No, not through volunteers, but I mean, it's a good question. We were also talking about lunch. We shared the tinkering studio over in Saudi Arabia, and there are places that are interested in this work that we won't be able to reach physically. And I think the high touch point is definitely a part of it. It takes time and it takes people working through this stuff. But I think there is a way that you can scale it up in terms of kind of, it's almost like a grassroots enthusiasm that's building, and I think it's a combination. I think it's going to be a combination of kind of volunteer time that might come in the form of parents, kind of social groups, hacker spaces, clubs, things like that. Nannies, we actually have nannies that are coming to the tinkering studio as a group. They call it nanny camp. And they're coming together to spend some time in this place. But I think what it's really doing, it's tapping into personal interest and trying to connect folks in a way, either whether it's kind of who they are and what they do in their professional world or how they like to spend their time, outside of that work.
And so, I mean, I would echo that same sentiment. I think this is about a distributed idea that, first of all, we didn't invent. We didn't start this. This has been happening for eons in multiple cultures and multiple parts of the world. I think what we're doing is, through the Exploratorium, is we're saying we think this is important. And we're giving some form to how that might happen in a museum, with the hopes that we don't have to go to every museum to make it happen, but other educators, other artists, and other makers will actually take this on and start their own grassroots effort in their community centers or at their schools or at their homes. And so,
at their kitchen table. I mean, I want to see tinkering studios everywhere. It's an approach as much as it is a physical space.
We'd rather see 1,000 small groups work on this than work with 1,000 people in one space at one time.
All right.
Yeah.
So, given that tinkering is really interactive and I think physical sometimes too, how are you planning on developing that in a MOOC?
Yeah, I wish, it keeps me up at night, actually. So what we're trying to really do is we develop, right now we're in the process of shooting lots of video and stuff that we're going to be sharing. Some of it is going to be just this raw kind of canned footage, but then it's how do you support this and get people really talking about it and trying stuff out. We've talked about if we can't really require people to buy something, require people to actually do something, right? This is part of what Coursera has, a constraint that they've given us. Then what can we give them that is close to an experience at the Exploratorium as possible? Now, I'm hearing myself say this, and at the same time, I'm like, ugh, like I don't want anything to do with it. But I actually do. I feel like there are people out there that even if they can't access these materials, they can see. We're going to give them chances to really see raw footage of what some of this stuff looks like in the tinkering studio, and really
in
talk
classrooms and in community centers, right?
Yep, and really dig into what's the difference? What's tinkering? What's engineering? What are those differences? Engineering, making, tinkering. When do you see stuff happening that you think is rich, and why? What's the evidence for what you see is going on? And then we're also talking to classroom teachers that we've been working with. We've actually sent some of these tinkering activities out to them. I think their words speak much louder than ours when they say things like, my students have never responded this way when I've taught this subject matter in the past. So I'm excited about that. We are really going to try to get people to do this stuff because we really believe it is so much about the stuff. So we're choosing some things that have, we hope, low enough threshold or barriers to entry that they can actually scrounge the stuff and get tinkering. And then we'll try to have these talk about sessions just kind of break out over the MOOC to get people either through affinity groups. We're not quite sure. I mean, all of this is really to say this is a big experiment for us. But we feel like we have a community of practice that we just developed, opened in last fall. We've got 190 museums around the world that now are interested in this making and tinkering idea. So it's taking lots of different shapes in lots of different places, but we're connected in that we're trying to do similar things for folks. So I don't know. It feels like it's important to try, even though I'm really skeptical about it.
You're tinkering with movement.
Yes, we're tinkering with tinkering.
Yeah, how do you grade a tinkering class?
Yeah.
I think these are some really profound questions that we're trying to figure out. And, by the time we do this 5 times, we may have a better answer. But we're going to give it our best. Yes?
Have you tried a number of ways for people to bring their results of their tinkering and their tinkering problems and so on into the Exploratorium? Because, a significant tinkering project may take weeks, months.
Exactly. Absolutely. One of the designs of the environment is that it is a repository of projects that people either construct and build at the Exploratorium or might bring from home, or we might ask them to bring and share in the context of the activity. So when we're doing a bunch of sewn circuit and paper circuit electronic greeting cards, we'll ask people to bring in the things that they're working on or the things that they've created so we can share them alongside other visitors that are building things. But even better than that, we're trying to give these ideas away as any way we can. So we hand out a flyer that says, here's the PDF so you can go home and make your own marble board if you go to Home Depot. Or go online because we have this project encapsulated in some sort of activity guide. And what we find is that many, many people do this. They go back and they start building their own contraptions at home. And then they end up coming back to us repeatedly because they have further questions about how something is built, or they want to try out the component that they built at home on the marble board at the Exploratorium. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that we're there in the space with the visitors. We now represent a different facet of the Exploratorium, and that we are people who are deeply curious and interested in what the visitors are bringing to us, and we get to know them by their first names, and they know us by their first names. So there's a relationship that builds that's really profound in that way.
But also, I would say we're interested in it online as well. We teamed up with Science Friday, and we're actually in the middle of this right now. So I want to encourage all of you, it's #MachineArt. So the idea was we wanted people to create something that made art, right? And we sent this all call out, I guess, 2 weeks ago. It's wrapping up. Mike and I are going on the show next week. I can't believe the submissions we're getting. There's some hilarious analog ones. A guy hung a pendulum from his sailboat and it drips paint. And you see him in different conditions with different seas. That one's a pretty funny one. There's a drone that creates, they're just as creative as you can possibly imagine. From kids doing these things to adults to groups of hobbyists. I absolutely love the things that people are coming up with. And the range, it's just, so I want to do more of that. I feel like right now it's all aggregated on a Rebel Mouse page that Science Friday put together, but I would be very curious to know that the people who are offering up these submissions to this invitation, do they feel connected with these other folks? We're going to be interviewing some of the people that have submitted things, on air, but I'm encouraged by what I see there too. Their challenge to us was help us turn our listeners into doers, to makers, to tinkerers. So, yeah.
Yes?
So, granted, I've never been to the Exploratorium, so this might have just be a question that would be answered the moment I walk in.
But you're going to come soon, yes?
But possibly. Kind of, where does where in your vision of the Exploratorium is the line, or not the Exploratorium, but the tinkering space? Where is the line between your exploring and tinkering spaces and the kind of hacker spaces that are popping up elsewhere? Are you exploring potentially integrating coding into your tinker space?
Yeah, absolutely. I really feel like constructing with cardboard and coding, those two things are both about construction to me. So I welcome that. And I feel like for hacker spaces, the thing I want people to do when they come into the tinkering studio is kind of just be turned on to this world that's out there. The Crucible over in the East Bay, Noise Bridge in San Francisco, like I want them to connect with communities of other folks. So we bring them in to kind of highlight their work and talk about it. And hopefully, you know, people will, you can even start up your own. We've done something with Make in the past for young makers, which was also getting clubs of kids making things in people's garages kind of around the Bay Area.
But there is some of a difference. It's a little different than hackerspaces or Tech Shop, for example. I mean, Tech Shop is where you can go to build out the idea that you've developed. And I think that is an important place in the ecology of this work. I think Tinkering Studio plays an important role in that it actually, before you get to Tech Shop, here's an opportunity for you to engage with these types of tools and materials for the first time, and actually to practice the development of an idea so that you can bring it to Tech Shop and produce that idea. So we're not a production shop. We don't have rows of 3D printers and rows of vinyl cutters, but we do have a few of those tools to experiment in the context of meaningful activities so that you can get a first sense of it.
Yeah, and I would say people, in general, one myth kind of about tinkering and making in museums that I run into, it's this just throw about a bunch of stuff out on the table and something good will happen. We do shape it more than that. We definitely kind of pick a territory that we're investigating, but the richness really comes not from in the variety of stuff, but the variety of people that are interacting with that stuff.
Do you have kits for sale?
We have a vending machine.
We do have a vending machine. So, you know, this is another one. This is this raging debate. In the book, we have ways to get started. Mm-hmm. How do you tell people how to get started without giving them a 1, 2, 3, 4? Mm-hmm. So how do you offer a kit that is open enough that allows for lots of possibilities and not necessarily that the things that you make in the kit, that you make in the kit, that you make in the kit are all going to be the same? It's not that those aren't cool. I mean, I've done hundreds of those, but that's not really where our interest lies. But the answer to your question, we are trying to develop some kits. It's hilarious to watch our development team debate about kind of what to do, what
because
not
we're
to do.
trying to sell yogurt containers, strawberry baskets, and hot glue. Right? I mean, and nothing more than that. No fancy packaging, no sort of excited little robotic text on. It's the real raw materials that we feel are important to get you started with some of these activities. So there's sort of an interesting unkit idea there that we're trying to push through.
But wait, at the same time, so the paper circuits, Ji, I don't know if any of you are familiar with her work, but she's a computer scientist at the Media Lab. She's done some cool work with circuitry. She's come up with this thing called circuit stickers that allows you to kind of play with programming physically, putting stickers down on top of copper tape. The copper tape is slug tape. You get it at Home Depot to keep slugs out of your plants. So I want a kit that has that. But at the same time, if you get totally into soldering, I want you to know about a Weller soldering iron. So we have these funny debates about kits need to be cheap. I'm like, kits need to be good. You know, yeah. So
part of the reason for a silly question was I can imagine some science teacher somewhere in some school wanting to do this, coming from the old textbook-driven learning experience and not knowing how to introduce this into a classroom. Yeah. And so the idea of a kit is less about the things, but a pedagogy or a program that could be handed to them.
That I would like to say we're going to do in the MOOC. I hope. Okay. I hope people will leave with that because we get pretty meta. We do talk a lot of pedagogy about the stuff, but we offer you 6 ways to get started that range in something, you know, if you're going on the high computation end, it's how to work with makey-makeys. Do you guys know what makey-makey is? With students, but then also like the scribbling machines that Mike was talking about, yogurt cups and offset motors.
But kind of the little fun part was that we have like a little cooking show motif. It's like if you really want to get started exploring simple circuits in your classroom, pull together some blocks of wood, these few components that you might find in a dissected toy, and here's how we solder and build the components. So we do that in our regular professional development workshops where teachers and after-school professionals come in and actually physically build the parts that they then take back to their classrooms. Here's a way through the MOOC to try to share that on a broader scale. Yes.
She's a shill. Go ahead.
Maybe. Let's see what she says.
I'm asking a real question. I'm sitting here thinking that what you do in a way is phenomenon first learning. which is wonderful, and I love everything about it. And I'm also sitting here thinking about the applicability of this to undergraduate education at this university, and all of your principles would work and be meaningful and wonderful, but the actual implementation of something like that would be incredibly complex and would require, I mean, you're talking about 25 years from now or 20 years from now, what is university life going to be like? But I wonder if you can say anything in this forum about that and what you could imagine with something like a biology core course or what starts to happen if you really start applying a tinkering frame of mind to disciplinary content at the higher education level. And if you don't care to speak to that, don't. But I know you've had experience with people of all ages all around the world, and might have some pretty interesting insights about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's incredibly fun to think about this. Difficult to see, but I really feel like watching this upswell in hackerspaces and kind of the enthusiasm for making in general that's happening. I feel like it really could shape the way we think about things, the way you determine the courses for next semester. How do you do that, right? The things that you offer in the course, how do you get people, well, I mean, the D-School is doing this too, like working across disciplinary boundaries. I think that's part of it. I think who you recruit, typically people who lead classes have a certain background. Can that change some? I'm not saying throw away all your professors, but think about community assets. They really are assets. How can you tap into and involve those folks?
I mean, and I would ask the question, whether you're a graduate school professor or whether you're a kindergarten teacher, by not doing this work, by not getting engaged firsthand with phenomenon and materials and constructing in social areas, what are you giving up with anything that you're trying to share or to teach? And so it's not throwing out the bathwater, but trying to figure out in a biology seminar or in a mathematics seminar, what is it about the physical manipulation of materials that can help us not only help us for those of us who are at graduate school, but what about the 90% of kids who are not going to go to graduate school because they didn't think science or math was for them? And so where I think it's important at the graduate school level, it's also important to just generate that initial engagement and to try to figure out what elements are missing like this from what you might already be doing.
I feel like you see more kind of students being driven by what they're motivated by. Sometimes it's by who they're working under, the lab that they're working in. But I feel like you see a lot more of that in graduate school. I think we could do a lot of rethinking for undergrad stuff in that realm in particular. Yeah.
So in terms of the overall vision, definitely pertains to learning, but kind of extending that idea a little bit. It seems that this could be an opportunity for the less privileged or for people who cannot afford the top-of-the-line toys or products, and it's a great way to teach them about how they can, do these do-it-yourself projects and kind of build things for their kids or for their family at a much lower cost. So have there been any thoughts to that level as to, can this be really beneficial for the society from a cost perspective?
Yeah, that is probably the aspect of this work that excites me the most. I really see that as its biggest, greatest potential. I think sometimes I think Make and Maker Faire get unnecessarily dinged by saying it's only high tech, it's only for guys, whatever it may be. But I feel like if it's really about this aspect of making that is really tinkering, truly tinkering with whatever it is you're working on, that's universal. And having people be able to enter this, no matter where they are or what situation they find themselves in, it's a reverence for ideas, right? And I feel like that's, if we're talking about what we want to do for society 20 years from now, I want to celebrate people's ideas. And that doesn't matter their background at all, but they do need to be able to participate.
Any thoughts on software being easier or harder to tinker with than the physical toys? Like, are there ways to get software to be easier to tinker?
Well, I think designing for tinkerability, I mean, Mitchell actually wrote a chapter about this.
Yeah, so Scratch is like one point example, but I feel like that's a playground. And are there other such playgrounds, or are we sort of restricted to that kind of thing?
Well, I mean, so the tricky bit about software is the people who design it know it so intimately, and you're trying to create a tool for others to use, right? But it's how to, I don't know, I feel like some software, it has tremendous potential for this, but I also know that like clunky interfaces stifles that.
I mean, I don't think we're there yet. I think we've got a lot of work to do in order to make, let's not talk about cost. Let's just talk about the interface of the use for 3D printers and programming for Galileo or for Arduino and others. I mean, there's such a high learning curve that we can't do it right now on the floor in even a 3-hour interaction.
So let me maybe reframe my question slightly. This is helping. So Scratch, Mindstorms, all these kinds of things are great, but there are also programming languages more or less built from the ground up to be things that you can explore with.
Yeah.
And when I see you taking apart toys and repurposing them, that's different. That's a set of professionals who created something for one purpose, and yet when you actually cut it open, you can understand its workings well enough to adapt it for something else.
Right.
Why is that so hard with software? Is it that like the level of complexity is higher? Somehow I have trouble believing that.
Yeah, no, I don't know. Like that, it's that subversive quality to taking something and reworking it that I love so much. But yeah, how could you build that into software, that capability that really, well, yeah. I mean, people who love Linux, they'll argue that that does that. But, for the rest of us, not so much. Yeah.
Yeah. Yes.
Have you, along that line, potentially toyed with like maybe having a pre-built, say, take a Stanford CS106A student's breakout game pre-built and have kind of tinkering with the pre-existing source code to possibly let kids like see that, oh, changing this variable here changes speed, or changing this variable changes the color of the ball or the bricks.
Well, I think that the point is, in every one of the cases that we highlighted and talked about, it is about messing with the variables. And so whether it's a variable on the computer screen or whether it's the variable of how many batteries are connected to your bulb, the fact that you could change a variable and then see an immediate response to that is key. And depending on how the program is written or how the toy is constructed, you're not always able to take just one quick step to see a big change in the variable. And so I think that has a lot to do with how we might conceptualize that type of engagement. Yes?
So related to the question about the underprivileged, but in the other direction, if you look at corporations, I know you guys have had a lot of collaborations in the past. Are you seeing a difference in the way corporations are talking about tinkering and creativity in their own workplace from, say, 10 years back?
Yeah, it used to be IDEO and D-School. And now we're fielding calls, and I know my colleagues are fielding calls from small and medium-sized corporations all across the country wanting to be thinking differently about how they approach the work that they do, but even more importantly, how they structure their own environment, how they have collaborative teams working together, how the organization is organized around ideas rather than capacities and experience that you might have as a graphic designer or a programmer or an engineer. And so I think because we see so many different people around the table and these activities engage so many different backgrounds and experience levels, we get I'm having a lot of conversations lately with corporations about that type of organizational structure.
They're even asking us to develop the ropes course for tinkering. Like, what would it look like to have either short-term tinkering experiences for people, and on the more ambitious side, bringing tinkering studios directly into their companies.
And it's not just corporate organizations. We worked with the Dalai Lama's monks a couple of years ago because they're geshes who are the community organizers and educators in the Tibetan communities in India. Were looking for ways of thinking about science in a slightly different way and looking for ways of engaging the population in these science experiences. And so there's a whole retooling there of what science education means at that organizational level.
Organizations are moving towards more of a tinkering or creation model around ideas. Do you think that will affect the way people hire? Do you think that interviews will look more like tinkering sessions?
I think, well, maybe she's asking when people are hiring, like, what are they going to be looking for in terms of tinkering? Will you tinker with stuff when you go on an interview? You do when you interview with us. But I would also say people are looking, I'm noticing more and more, people are wanting portfolios, actually, that show evidence of making. A lot of the young makers that we work with, we're helping them develop those things. Really talk about what you're doing, share it, and whether physical objects are great, but yeah, digital portfolios I think that's gonna be part of what's required.
Tinker with the speakers.
Yeah, what's the craziest thing you've seen someone make out of stuff you didn't realize they could make?
Craziest thing.
You mean besides reconstructing vibrators and dildos?
Yeah, thanks, Mike.
I'm curious what they created with those, actually.
Headgear, yeah, it got really weird, let me just say that. For me, probably my favorite example of that, I should say, we were celebrating chain reaction, cause and effect, right? And it was, again, a February love related. Do you know that song, The Love Machine? I'm just a love machine. You know this? It's old. Anyway, if you look up the lyrics, it's really hilarious. It's all about gadgets and switches and electronics. It's really good. Anyway, we were the assignment, so to speak, when you came into the tinkering studio, we were giving lots of people the opportunity to build literal examples of love machines. And then we connected them all together and set this whole thing off, right? I absolutely loved the analogies, kind of the metaphors that people were coming up with for love. We had things like love sick, suffocation, like really, really kind of bizarre. Like we had the fluffy stuff too, but you had some pretty serious ones. And my favorite was an egg that was in a vise, hooked up to a slow-moving motor that slowly turned this vise, and this egg was actually getting physically distorted in shape. All of a sudden, it cracked and falls down on two pieces of aluminum foil that had a tiny crack in between them, and the goo, the yolk from the egg, completed a circuit and like tripped off the next one, which was like a pickle and bubbles. I mean, just crazy stuff. Yeah. That's probably my favorite. Thank you.